Hello. We'll get started here in just a little bit. I'm planning on just kind of going over the basics of what your writing portion of your test is going to look like. I'm going to give you some examples, and then I'm here to just do a Q&A if you have any questions for anything at all. We'll get started, let's say in about 5 minutes. So go do whatever you need to do. Grab some water, grab a writing utensil, grab some paper, and then we'll get into it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let me just make sure I go over the basics of what your writing portion of your test is going to look like. So you're going to take your multiple choice questions, which is going to be 55 questions in 55 minutes. Immediately after that, you're going to go into your short answer questions. So your short answer questions, you're going to answer three total. You have four options. You have 40 minutes to do that. Then you'll take a break. Then you're going to come back from your break, and you will have a chunk of time, an hour and 40 minutes, to respond to the DBQ and the LEQ. And that's what the breakdown of your test looks like. So let's look. And we're going to go over all of those different styles of writing today. Come on. So here's some vocab terms that you are going to see on your AP test. So these are the things that are going to start out the questions for your written responses for your FRQs. Oftentimes you're going to see describe, which just means provide the relevant characteristics of a specified topic. This Let me back up a little bit. When I first start teaching short answer questions to my students, the way that I do it is through claim evidence reasoning. Directly answer the question with a claim, provide specific evidence that supports that answer, that claim, and then tell me the how, the why, the so what. Your teacher might do something similar. Your teacher might do something like T, topic, evidence, analysis, or APE, answer, provide, explain, or ACE, answer, cite, explain. All of that is the same. So you are just wanting to make sure that you answer the question clearly, you support it with evidence, and then you tell me the how, the why, the so what. And if you're looking at the term describe specifically, technically, all you need to do is give me an answer and evidence because you're just providing relevant characteristics. You're not necessarily telling me the how, the why, the so what. But you will have more time than you think that you have to answer these short answer questions, especially because we're now typing everything. So if I were you, I would choose to just respond to every short answer question in the way that your teacher has probably told you in those 3 sentences, even if it says describe. Evaluate, you're going to see if it comes up, it's going to be on an FRQ, probably your LEQ or your DBQ, which is essentially saying, let's look at the evidence and then tell me if this thing or this thing was like the biggest cause or the biggest effect. Just a reminder, you can always land in the middle, which is going to lead you to that nuance, that complexity point. Explain just means, again, that reasoning. So if you're seeing explain in a short answer question, because it usually shows up kind of like describe this, explain this, that is making sure that you have that analysis piece in there. So you're providing information about how or why a relationship, process, pattern, position, situation, or outcome occurs using evidence and or reasoning. So yeah, just make sure that you see explain. That is definitely that reasoning piece. You have to have that third sentence in there. You often do not see identify anymore, which is nice because it's literally just one sentence. Okay. So let's go to your short answer questions. Just like I said, you're only going to have 40 minutes to answer your short answer questions. It's going to happen right after your multiple choice questions. You have to answer the first 2. So the first one is going to have a secondary source stimulus that is from the time period 1600 to 2001. The second one is going to have a primary source stimulus that is from the time period 1600 to 2001. For both of those, the AP test likes to ask questions about the point or the argument that the author is trying to make. So definitely take your time reading through those stimuli because you will have to answer questions about like an assertion that the author is making or something else that could support the claim that the author is making. For the third question, there's no stimulus. You're going to choose one and they deal with the same skill. The first option is going to be from the time period 1450 to 1815. And the second one is going to be from the time period 1815 to 2001. So well, I'll get to that in the end, but like there's really strategic ways that you can go about studying certain centuries for maximum success on the AP test. You're going to have about 13 minutes per question. So every question has an A, B, and a C. So you have 13 minutes to answer all of those. And again, I would just time yourself right now. If you haven't done it already, go find some short answer responses online, set a clock, and then see how fast you can get through the A, the B, and the C, because it's probably going to be a lot faster than 13 minutes, which is nice because then at the end of it, you can actually read through what you've written. You can add extra evidence, you can add extra reasoning, and you can make sure that these are the most perfect answers that you can give. So again, if you want to think about CER responses or T responses or APE or ACE responses, claim, you're going to directly answer the question with a claim. You're going to provide and support your answer with specific evidence. And then you're going to tell me the how, why, or so what. Y'all, you are not above sentence stems. If it's asking, explain an effect of whatever, you can answer with a claim, give me evidence, and say, this was an effect because. Honestly, I think those sentence starters, those sentence stems are going to be really helpful for you because it's one less thing to think about when you get to the AP test. Your brain is going to be so fried by the time you're writing that LEQ. And if you just can even remember sentence stems to force you to explain, this is an effect because, this is a cause because, this is a continuity because, if you literally just use the word because as often as you possibly can, that is going to set you up for success to get that analysis and reasoning piece. So I'm going to look at some examples. This is a short answer question from the 2018 exam. So what we have here, this is going to be, right, that secondary source by a guy named Jean Jaurès. He was a French politician talking about the history of the French Revolution, published in a series of articles between 1901 and 1904. So we know it's a secondary source because he's writing after the fact. He's reflecting on the French Revolution, but he's reflecting on the French Revolution through the lens of it being the 1900s. Here are questions. I'll go through one at a time, and then I'm going to give you how I would have answered them. So 1A is describe one prior intellectual change that influenced the events described in the passage. So intellectually, what's going on that would influence the French Revolution? The Enlightenment. Here's my answer. The Enlightenment and its focus on reason influenced the changes in the passage, right? I'm directly answering that question with a claim. And then I'm supporting with evidence. People like John Locke formulated the idea of the social contract, which encouraged people to overthrow a government that doesn't protect their natural rights. So in that one, I combined my evidence and my reasoning together in one sentence. You could also have used a French Enlightenment philosopher. This was just the first one that came to mind when I was typing away. The second question says, explain why the pattern of social changes that Jouwer describes led to the French Revolution. So again, now you're going to have to, if you haven't already, go back and read through the stimulus and make sure that you're trying to address the claim, the argument that he's making, and then how whatever he's saying actually led to the French Revolution. It's oftentimes quite helpful to reference exact things that the person uses in this stimulus. Or if you have a picture, which as of the last couple of AP tests, one of the stimulus for the SIQs will be an image. Reference specific things that you see in the image that support whatever you're trying to say. So my answer to that was the social change caused by the Enlightenment led to the French Revolution because the bourgeoisie began to view themselves and people who were deserving of more political and economic rights. So that's my answer. In order to gain those things, the bourgeoisie needed to reform their government or create a new one. That's my reasoning. By overthrowing Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, which you could argue is my specific evidence. This is, again, just a different way to think about claim evidence reasoning. I'm just kind of reworking them a little bit. But the basic point of these short answer questions is they're supposed to be short answer questions, and you just really need to show what you know. So you are not using pronouns. We are not saying they did these things. We are being specific about who did what things, right? I'm not saying the French people viewed themselves as people who were deserving of more rights. I'm saying the bourgeoisie, right? This middle class, this emerging middle class. They're like, hey, it's our turn to rule now. Like, it can't just be the first and second estate anymore. We want to rise up and also start to have power for ourselves. And the last one is explain how an ideology of the 1800s influenced Jouwer's interpretation of the causes of the French Revolution. You will see, 90% sure that you will see a question like this. So you are now looking at this person's understanding, his interpretation of the French Revolution, and the SAQ likes to ask questions about that interpretation. So are you understanding the claim that the author is making and why the author is making that claim? And then how can we ask you a question about that? Because he's writing this 200 years. Well, he's writing this in the 1900s. French Revolution happens in the late 1700s. So like, what else has influenced this French historian's understanding of the revolution now that he's looking back on it? So I said, Jouwer's interpretation was influenced by the rise of liberalism, that new ideology, those isms that happened in the 1800s. Jouwer calls those who fought in the revolution the bourgeoisie, which was a term that became more prominent in the 1800s. Also, Jouwer highlights liberal ideology like wealth and rights as key motivations for the revolution. So this is me like pulling apart exactly what he's saying and then looking at how what happened in the 1800s is impacting what he's saying and how he's saying it. This kind of even gets to one of those historical thinking skills, right? You're looking at the historical context and the perspective of this author and how he's reflecting on history from the past. So those are your short answer questions. After you take your short answer questions, you're going to take a break. I'm not actually entirely sure what this is going to look like on Blue Book. I don't know if it's going to be like the PSAT where it's like a self-timed break, or if how long it is. It's probably going to be about 10 minutes. So you'll probably be able to go to the bathroom or go do whatever you need to do before you come back and do the DBQ. If this is anything like the PSAT, your 10-minute timer will run down and then will immediately start whether or not you are in your seat. So make sure that you are paying attention to the time of the break that you have, because you want to use all 1 hour and 40 minutes for this second part of this test. You should spend 60 minutes writing your DBQ. That includes 15 minutes of prep time to go through the documents, read them, and organize them, and then 45 minutes to actually type up your essay. Your DBQ will only deal with events from 1600 to 2001. And DBQs are intended to be harder because the difference between a DBQ and an LEQ is that the DBQ, all of that evidence comes from the documents. The majority of that evidence will come from the documents, whereas with the LEQ, that evidence has to come from your brain. So because in a DBQ, you're essentially using sources to create an argument, it's going to be a little bit more challenging because it's going to try to get you to really put on your historical thinking hat and do some critical thinking of evidence that's in front of you, because that's what historians actually do. So I'm going to go over a couple of prompts, and then I'm going to go over the modern DBQ rubric because it changed 2 years ago. And oh no, it changed last year. And I want to make sure that you are up to date with the modern or the updated DBQ rubric, just in case it hasn't been like explicitly said in your class. So 2021 DBQ was evaluate whether the new imperialism of the late 1800s and early 1900s was caused primarily by political motivations or by economic motivations. So the way this DBQ looked like, and what you can actually do right now is you can Google 2021 AP Euro DBQ, and you can see all of the documents. You're going to have some documents that say that it was supported by political things, and some that say that it was supported by economic motivations. And you were just going to organize those documents together and tell me which one do you think it was motivated it more. The other thing that you could do here, and again, getting to that complexity point, is that some of these documents might mention something else as a motivating factor. And if I'm remembering correctly, don't quote me on this, I think it was religion would have been like another really easy theme to throw into this mix. And if you were able to throw this in, like that extra theme into this mix to talk about, yes, there were maybe economic motivating factors were the biggest one, but there were also some political motivating factors, but there were also some religious motivating factors that could get you one step closer to that complexity point. In 2022 DBQ was evaluate whether the English Civil War from 1642 to 1649 was motivated primarily by religious reasons or by political reasons. So you have a same kind of argument structure that you had last time, right? You're looking at two themes, which one motivated this thing more? Your 2023 DBQ, you have two options. So this is when we start to have the two different exams because everything's becoming more digital. So evaluate whether Romanticism maintained a connection to the Enlightenment or challenged the Enlightenment. So again, you are looking at both sides of a coin. Did it connect? Did it not connect? And then you're trying to draw a conclusion saying it did, it didn't, or it's somewhere in the middle. And the second one was evaluate whether the Haitian Revolution was caused primarily by the spread of Enlightenment ideas or by the conditions of enslavement. So same thing. As you are reading through these documents, you are going to see, oh, wow, some of it was inspired by the Enlightenment and all of those ideals passing on to the Haitians. But some of them were also inspired by the fact that they were enslaved. And then you're just going to say which one was more important, essentially. People were so mad about the Haitian Revolution DBQ. 2024, so this is from last year. Here are your two. Evaluate whether Italian fascism was a revolutionary movement or a traditional movement. And then evaluate whether the feminist movement of the 1800s was motivated primarily by desires to achieve economic equality or political equality. So you can see across all of these DBQs, it's essentially going to give you, is it this theme or is it this theme? And you are going to say it was this theme more than this theme, or it was both of the themes, or maybe we can add in another theme to the mix based on what the documents are saying. So your rubric for your DBQ. You are going to start out every single AP history essay the exact same way, whether it's an APUSH, AP World, or AP Euro. You're going to start out with a contextualization statement. This is situating the events of your prompt in the broader narrative of history. I like to think about it as a previously on for a new episode of TV. What do I exactly need to know so that the events of your prompt make sense when I get down to your thesis statement? Then you're going to answer the question with a thesis statement that establishes a historically defensible line of reasoning, which means you can't just say, for example, the feminist movement was motivated primarily by a desire to achieve economic equality. Because that's not establishing a line of reasoning. That line of reasoning just means, again, that you have to use the word because. You can say the feminist movement of the 1800s is motivated primarily by a desire to achieve economic equality because, and then a reason that you have from your documents, that would be totally appropriate. Just a reminder that instead of a conclusion at the end of any of your essays, you are going to restate your thesis statement. Conclusions are unnecessary, they're a waste of time, but you have just spent 30 to 45 minutes writing an essay. The argument is clearer in your brain at the end of that essay than it was at the beginning. So then rewrite your thesis statement, restate that claim now that it's had time to ruminate and process in your brain at the very end. Because there have been so many times when students at the very first part, their very first thesis statement, did not say because or was not factually correct. But because I always have my students write their thesis statement at the end, I've given a thesis statement for a point that occurs. I've given a point for a thesis statement that occurs at the very end of the essay that wouldn't have gotten one at the beginning. So because they rewrote their thesis statement, they got a point. Please remember that. So here's where our evidence points come from your DBQ. If you use the content of 3 documents to address the topic of the prompt, you get a point. If you list some evidence from a document that is related to the prompt. That is 1 point. You are so much smarter than that. If you support an argument in response to the prompt using at least 4 documents, so you're not just listing evidence from the documents, but then you are proving to me how that evidence is supporting whatever claim you are making, you get 2 points. This does not mean that you should only use 4 documents in your DBQ, because what if you misinterpret one? Your goal is to use at least 6. So if there's one document that you come across and you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you don't have to use it. Just really focus on the other 6 and make sure that you're incorporating all 6 of those in your claim and in your essay. Those are your first 2 points. So you either get 1 or 2 based on that. Then another point comes from evidence beyond the documents. While the majority of your evidence should come from the documents, you should also be knowledgeable enough about history that you can bring in something that is very clearly absent from the documents that is supporting whatever claim you are trying to make. So this is, again, pulling out evidence from your brain that you think would help support your argument, but that evidence cannot be present in the document. It just has to be from your big brains, and it cannot be a passing phrase or reference. So when you try to get this evidence beyond the documents point, this should be like 2 to 3 sentences. You want to fully explain this evidence beyond the documents and how it relates back to the prompt and then your thesis, your answer to the prompt. Here's where it gets fun. So those are the first 5 points. If I'm going to be real honest, you should get at minimum of a 5 on your DBQ. Context, thesis, listing evidence, using 4 documents to support your claim. So you should get 2 instead of 1 right there. And then evidence beyond the documents. That's 5 out of 7. That's a great DBQ score. Then we get to the more challenging ones, the analysis and reasoning pieces. So for your first analysis piece, for 2 documents out of the 7, or the 6 that you're going to use in your essay, you need to explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant. Your teacher probably taught this as HIP. That's what I use in my class. Historical context, intended audience, purpose, perspective. How is one of those things affecting what is being said and how it's being said? If I'm going to be real honest, the 2 easiest of those HIP pieces to get is historical context and purpose. If you are knowledgeable enough about history in this class, you can add in the historical context before or after any document. But again, it really depends on if you know the time period and if you know the content. Because just a reminder, historical context is not just the events before, but it also does include the events after. I always like to talk about it as the events before because I think that's most helpful for students to understand when they're thinking about history. But you can also reference what is happening like immediately after that document that maybe like this author is alluding to. That would count too. And then the final piece comes from complex understanding. This used to be really hard to get. This is now much easier to get. This involves you critically thinking about the prompt and bringing in nuanced, sophisticated answers. The best way to do this is if we're looking here. Examine multiple themes or perspectives. Examine multiple causes or effects, similarities or differences, continuities or changes. Explain cause and effect, similarity and difference, continuity or change, right? So you are now really trying to, if it's just saying like evaluate the biggest change of this thing, if you're also going to talk about causes in there, that could be a way to get this point. But the easiest way to do this now are these 2. These are new. If you effectively use all 7 documents, that's your complexity point. I said you should use 6. You should use at least 6. If you know every single document, and if you have the time, right, you should be timing yourselves writing these essays now. Try, just at least try for all 7 documents, because the worst that could happen is that you misinterpret one of them. But you're still getting 6. You're still getting hopefully those 2 evidence points right there. Or if you can effectively source 4 documents. So rather than just sourcing 2, which will get you 1 point, if you source 4, that'll get you 2 points because it'll get you this point here. My kind of like final wrap up about HIP or sourcing documents is if it's something that you've struggled with all year long, just ignore it. Like genuinely spend the rest of your time using all of your documents to support your claim, because you can still get 6 out of 7 if you do that. You would just miss the 1 sourcing point if you're still effectively using all 7 documents. So that's kind of my piece on sourcing, because I know either some students really get it or some students don't. And if you're still trying to practice it because you don't understand it this late in the game, I would maybe just start to shift your focus to focusing on the things that you know you can do well. That brings us to the long essay question. You will, in theory, have 40 minutes. So there's not going to be a timing breakdown. This is all on you. So you need to manage your time well. Just a reminder, like the Blue Book will have that little timer above. So you'll be able to see how much time you have left. So 60 minutes with your DBQ, 40 minutes on your LEQ, prep for 5 minutes. Y'all, you need to have some kind of outline of where you're going because so many times, I'm sure this has happened to you, you get halfway through an essay and you're like, wait, what am I trying to say? What is my claim? What is my argument? So if you just prep beforehand and you organize your thoughts, then you will able to, if you get to that writer block, be able to look back to see what you had already planned out before you had actually started writing. In this prep time, you should also bullet point specific pieces of evidence that you want to use in your essay. So again, that if you come to that writer's block, if you forget, if you totally like glaze out, you will be able to look back at that and be like, oh yes, I need to put this in here. I need to be as specific as possible. These will all deal with the same skill, and there are going to be 3 questions. You're going to choose one. So just like that, kind of the third or fourth for the short answer question, you're going to get options with your long essay question as well. And they will all come from 3 different time periods: 1450 to 1700, 1648 to 1914, 1815 to 2001. And you get to choose. So I really love this again about the College Board. I think they're actually trying to set you up for success, for you to be as successful as possible, because you can choose to answer a question that you know the best rather than them just saying, this is what it has to be, which is what the AP test was like when I first started teaching AP. Same thing for your rubric. Thesis is a point, contextualization is a point. Those should be by now. Those should be done. So easy. For evidence for an LEQ, you need to use more than one piece of evidence because it says specific examples. If you list 2 pieces of evidence related to the topic or the prompt, you get a point. You are so much smarter than that. To earn 2 points, the response must use specific historical evidence to support an argument in response to the prompt. Again, this is using that reasoning language. This is because, this is due to, just use the word because all the time. If you think about writing a body paragraph in a long essay question, or really in any history essay, you have a topic sentence, and then you have some evidence, and then you have some reasoning, and then you have some evidence, and then you have some reasoning, and then you have a concluding sentence. That's a great body paragraph right there. Just make sure that when you list evidence, you are not just listing. You can list it out in a sentence, but then you are using that evidence immediately afterwards to support your argument. Again, no pronouns. No, they did these things. Who did what things? Be as specific as possible. Show the reader that you actually understand what you've learned in this class. LEQs are out of 6 points, DBQs are out of 7 points. So the last 2 points for your LEQ come from analysis and reasoning. You get 1 point if you use historical reasoning, for example, comparison, causation, or CCOT, to frame or structure an argument that addresses the prompt. This is a lot easier than it sounds because a lot of these essays will naturally have a historical thinking skill in the prompt. It could be evaluate the most significant effect of the printing press. If that's the case, make sure that all of the evidence that you're using, you're tying back to being an effect of the printing press. You can do this by using sentence stems such as, this was an effect of the printing press because, right? Again, you want to make sure you're using language from the prompt and make sure you're using because all the time. If you do that, you get 1 point. Or you can demonstrate complexity to get that 2nd point. So this is a 1 or 2, whereas with the DBQ, the complexity is its own standalone point. The way that you can do this in your LEQ, which is so easy, these are all the same things that we've talked about for your DBQ. Use 4 pieces of evidence. You probably already do that. Use 4 pieces of evidence, and that will get you that if you use them effectively and they are correct, that will get you that 2nd point right here. But another way that you can do this, and this is why I always have my students structure their thesis statements in a really particular formula, is you can address multiple effects. So like think about it thematically. If you're looking at, again, the effects of the printing press, you could talk about like cultural changes, and you could also talk about religious changes. So examining multiple effects kind of within different themes is a way to get this. Or you can talk about cause and effect. Talk to me about the causes of the rise of the printing press, and then you can talk to me about what that led to. Again, none of this can be passing phrases or references. This needs to be well thought out. And that is why writing things down, taking 5 minutes to prep and prepare before you actually start typing your essay is going to be most helpful for you. So here are your LEQ prompts from last year, just to give you an idea of what you could be looking at. First one is evaluate the most significant change in European art during the period 1450 to 1700. Renaissance to Baroque. Y'all, oh, love it. I love art. Evaluate the most significant change in international relations within Europe during the period 1789 to 1815. Y'all, the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Or evaluate the most significant economic change in Europe during the period 1945 to 1989. So this could talk about like the rise of consumerism. You could talk about the Marshall Plan. You could talk about essentially all of the economic ideologies in the Cold War in the West versus the East. And also talking about the West versus the East in your answer to this question could get you that complexity point as well. So to kind of summarize everything up, I'll go over these first. The other option for the LEQ of the 2024 exam, so exam number 2, was evaluate the most significant effect of European overseas expansion on the European economy in the period of 1450 to 1700. Wow. Mercantilism, agricultural revolution, commercial revolution. Number 3, evaluate the most significant effect of the centralization of state power in the period 1650 to 1815. You can talk about the rise of absolutism in the West or in the East, or both, if you want to get that complexity point. Or evaluate the most significant effect of the spread of democratic ideas on European politics in the 1800s, revolutions of 1848, revolutions in general, like people now have the right to vote and they didn't have the right to vote before. Kind of all of that rise of nationalism you could talk about for that last question. So with that being said, let's just talk about strategic studying and then I'll be done. Here are the time period breakdowns that you will be asked about in your free response questions. Your free response questions total, SAQ, DBQ, LEQ, 60% of your grade. Your multiple choice questions are 40%. So the majority of your grade comes from your writing, which I love. Oh, I love it so much. And if we're looking at the writing, you can choose not to write about anything before the 1600s. That doesn't, 1450 to 1600 is still going to show up in your multiple choice questions. Of course, they're going to ask questions about the Protestant Reformation. And of course, they're going to ask questions about the Renaissance. But strategically, you probably know those relatively decently. When we get to actual studying of things that you need to bank on this weekend and things that you really need to study this weekend, just make timelines from the 1600 on, because you don't need to choose to answer this short answer question. You don't need to choose to answer this LEQ. So if you do this right, if you study 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, those 4 centuries, you will be able to, in theory, nail these written responses. Cool. That is where I am going to stop. And y'all, best of luck. You can do it. I believe in you. Your test is so soon. Make sure you study this weekend. Study in groups. Study by saying things out loud. Make sure that you are consistently studying and you're not cramming the night before. Like study for 20 minutes in the morning and then go on a walk and then do other things and then study for like an hour at lunch and then do other things and then study at night. That repetitive studying is going to be helpful, way more helpful than just trying to cram everything the night before. All right. Bye, guys.